Most military history is told from the front, where flags move and names get remembered. But armies are often undone much farther back, where one missing delivery can quietly ruin a brilliant campaign. That is the history of military logistics. It is the long effort to keep people fed, animals watered, machines fueled, wounds treated, and broken things replaced after the march has already begun. The question sounds simple until you try to answer it at scale. How do you push organized human effort across distance without letting hunger, weather, friction, and time tear it apart first? That answer matters because courage can win a moment, but logistics decides whether that moment can last. Once you see that, battles stop looking isolated. They start looking like the visible edge of a much larger system, with roads, depots, barges, ledges, horses, rails, ports, pipelines, and pallets all hiding just off frame. Ancient armies learned the first rule early. Men and animals consume food, water, time, and energy every day, whether a battle happens or not. That made supply a survival problem before it became a military science. A commander could be bold, but boldness still had to eat before sunset. Empires answered that problem with stored grain, pack animals, river transport, and depots placed along likely routes. Movement became possible when resupply had been imagined before the army arrived. The Romans pushed this farther than most by combining roads, engineers, disciplined transport, fortified camps, and local requisition into one coherent system. Their legions could move quickly because logistics was not behind the army. It was built into the way the army moved. A Roman camp was more than a place to sleep. It turned arrival into readiness with unusual speed. That practical rhythm mattered because it reduced waste, confusion, and vulnerability. Rome did not merely send force outward, it sent a method for staying there after the first effort of expansion had passed. Centuries later, the Mongols proved there was more than one way to solve the same problem. Their mobility depended on discipline, remount horses, route planning, and a lean style of campaigning that let speed become a logistical advantage rather than a reckless gamble. That is one of the enduring lessons of the subject. Speed is not the opposite of logistics, because the faster you move, the more brutally the math punishes mistakes. As warfare grew larger and more organized in early modern Europe, supply became more formal and more visible. Depots, magazines, bakeries, bridges, and lines of communication started shaping campaigns before armies even saw one another. This was an age when ambition kept colliding with roads, seasons, and distance. Few things have humbled grand plans more consistently than mud that refuses to cooperate on schedule. Pre-stocked supply depots allowed armies to draw food, equipment, and ammunition along the route instead of relying on whatever the countryside might yield. That made armies more capable, but also more dependent on the systems that sustained them. Generals now had to think in layers. They were no longer deciding only where to fight, but how to move, where to pause, what to carry, what to store, and how not to thin an army into exhaustion before the main effort even began. In the 19th century, Antoine-Henri Jomini helped give this practice a durable name by treating logistics as the practical art of moving armies. He was describing a Napoleonic world where warfare had become faster, larger, and far less forgiving of administrative failure. Napoleon exploited speed brilliantly, using corps that could move separately and combine quickly while cutting baggage and pressing for momentum. But the Russian campaign revealed the permanent law beneath the brilliance. Range feels glorious right up until supply becomes the main event. That lesson has echoed ever since. The farther an army moves from prepared support, the more every mile quietly submits an invoice. Then the industrial age multiplied everything. Railroads, steamships, the telegraph, and mass production turned logistics from a difficult supporting craft into something closer to a national operating system. For the first time, armies could move huge numbers of people and material with sustained speed over great distances. But that speed only worked when timetables, depots, repair shops, ports, and communications all worked together. The American Civil War made that new reality unmistakable. Railroads did not just carry troops toward battle, they reorganized the scale on which campaigns could even be imagined. By World War I, logistics had become industrial in both quantity and consequence. Rail and shipping carried enormous burdens, motor transport kept growing, and the battlefield was now attached to mines, mills, factories, freight yards, and docks far behind the front. This was the turning point where war stopped being sustained mainly by local reach. The battlefield was still where armies fought, but the real depth behind it now stretched through whole economies. A timetable could now matter almost as much as a battle plan. History tends to favor the side that can move steel, food, fuel, and replacements with less delay and less confusion. World War II pushed all of this into full view. Mechanized armies needed fuel, tires, engines, spare parts, ammunition, food, transport, medical support, and repair capacity at a scale that made older systems look almost handmade. Before D-Day, Allied planners faced a problem so large it still feels slightly unreasonable. How do you land a massive force on open beaches and keep it supplied before you seize a major port? One answer was the Mulberries, the prefabricated harbors designed, towed across the Channel, and assembled off Normandy so ships could unload into an artificial port complex within days of the landings. It was a remarkable feat of engineering, and a reminder that sometimes the decisive breakthrough is not a weapon, but a way of landing what weapons need. Fuel needed its own answer, which led to Pluto, the pipeline system used to move petrol from Britain to continental Europe. It was not glamorous, which is often how you can tell a logistical idea is serious. Then came the Red Ball Express, the great truck convoy network that kept supplies moving after the Allied advance outran ordinary delivery systems in France. Beginning on August 25, 1944, its drivers moved more than 412,000 tons of supplies before the system ended on November 16, 1944. That mattered because mobility without resupply is just a faster route to disappointment. A tank without fuel and artillery without shells still look impressive for a moment, but history is rarely kind to machines that cannot be replenished. By the end of the war, the United States had built a logistical system of extraordinary range, speed, and continuity. The fighting still mattered, of course, but fighting skill had to be fed, fueled, armed, transported, repaired, and reinforced before it could matter at the scale the war demanded. If strategy struck the spark, logistics supplied the fuel that kept the fire alive. It was what turned the first burst of force into something that could endure. After 1945, military logistics did not fade back into the scenery. It became a permanent profession of airlift, sealift, maintenance, warehousing, standardization, prepositioned stock, and global planning. The late 20th century added containers, tighter data systems, and a much closer relationship between military power and global commerce. Sometimes history changes not through a dramatic new weapon, but through a better way to stack, track, load, and unload things without losing half the day. That may sound almost comically practical, but campaigns change when systems move thousands of items faster, with fewer errors and less damage. Operation Desert Shield made the modern scale of logistics impossible to miss. Combat forces reached Saudi Arabia quickly in 1990, but support systems had to expand just as urgently because arriving first and being sustained afterward are not remotely the same achievement. Heavy equipment moved by ship, rail, barge, and truck, while logisticians built reception, onward movement, stockage, distribution, maintenance, and basic support under difficult conditions. The build-up drew little attention, but it showed how modern force becomes sustainable. Pre-positioned stock helped, but it was not nearly enough by itself to sustain 500,000 service members in that austere environment. Depots, planners, transport networks, and an enormous flow of ordinary necessities turned deployment into endurance. Today, the system extends through global ports, airfields, warehouses, fuel networks, data links, maintenance chains, and agencies that manage supply from raw material to final use. The software would have baffled a Roman quartermaster, but the mission itself would have felt familiar in a heartbeat. So the history of military logistics is not a footnote to military history. It is military history seen from the bloodstream instead of the fist. From grain routes and remount horses to rail junctions, floating harbors, pipelines, forklifts, and digital tracking, the central challenge has hardly changed. How do you carry organized human effort across distance without letting it break under its own weight? There is something quietly moving in the answer, because it is built from foresight, competence, restraint, and care under pressure. Behind every campaign were people loading, counting, routing, repairing, cooking, lifting, driving, fueling, building, and solving so that someone else could arrive ready instead of arrive empty. It shows how preparation can seem invisible right up until its absence becomes catastrophic. Military power is not only the ability to strike, it is the ability to remain, recover, and keep going when distance, weather, and exhaustion begin to take their toll. From Roman roads to global supply chains, military logistics has always been the lifeline behind the force. You're always welcome here, and remember, it's Illumentary.